Hello, my name is Doug Mosier, and I'm with the Oakland Fire Safe Council. In this short video, I'm going to cover the GENOAK Emergency Two-Way Radio Network. GENOAK stands for GMRS Emergency Network for Oakland. Before getting started, I want to point out a couple of websites that we encourage you to take a look at. The first is our GENOAK website at genoak.org. There is a lot of information on this site, including how to participate in GENOAK, how to use your two-way radio, and even some recommended radios that you may want to consider to purchase. So please do take a look at genoak.org. The other website is our Oakland Fire Safe Council website at oaklandfiresafecouncil.org. On that site, we also have a lot of information, specifically on emergency preparedness and wildfire safety. So please do take a look at both of those websites, and in particular, genoak.org. So getting started, I want to first compare and contrast a cell phone, or in this case, mobile phone, with two-way radio. I think most of us are probably very familiar with cell phones, but maybe not so many folks are familiar with two-way radios and how they work. So first, both a cell phone or smartphone and a two-way radio work by transmitting radio waves. So in essence, a smartphone, cell phone, is a two-way radio. The difference is that cell phones need to connect to cell towers and a cellular infrastructure to be able to communicate, certainly over any distance. Two-way radios, on the other hand, do not need any towers to connect to or any infrastructure. Two-way radios can talk to other two-way radios over quite a long distance without any tower in between. Now, two-way radios can also use a tower, and in that case it's called a repeater, and we're going to talk about repeaters in a bit because a repeater is central to how GENOAK operates. And a repeater can be used with a two-way radio to increase the area that the radio can cover. One other difference between cell phones or smartphones and two-way radios is that on a cell phone, conversations are most often one-to-one, and you usually know who you're talking with or who you're calling. Yes, you can have conference calls and Zoom conferences and so on, but most cell phone calls are typically one-to-one. With a radio, communications are one-to-many. So when you transmit or talk on a radio, you may have many people out there who are listening, and you may have some of those people who want to connect back with you, talk with you. And you may not necessarily know who they are until they talk back to you. So that is a difference. Cell phones one-to-one, radios are one-to-many. A difference between the two is that we all know with a cell phone, smartphone, you need a service plan, usually a monthly fee, to be able to use that phone. With a two-way radio, they are free to talk on. Now, you do need a license to use some two-way radios, specifically the GENOAK network two-way radios, GMRS. We'll talk about that. There is a one-time fee for a license from the Federal Communication Commission, the FCC, but after you have your license, and it's not costly, then it's free to talk. You can use your radio as often as you like, and there is no monthly fee or any other charge. With a cell phone or smartphone, we all know there is a phone number associated with that, and that's how you identify yourself, or the phone identifies itself, and you make your call, or you are called via that cell phone number. With a two-way radio, there is no number associated with a radio, but instead you use what's called a call sign, and that is acquired from the FCC. When you get your license, they give you a call sign, and that's how you identify yourself over the two-way radio, and we will cover that also in a little bit. Here's one important difference. A cell phone or smartphone may or may not work well or even at all during and after a major disaster or an emergency. The reason being is that because the cell phones need to connect to cell towers and cellular infrastructure, and that infrastructure, those towers, can be damaged in the event of a major earthquake, a wildfire, a flood, and so on. So there's no guarantee that the cell phone will work during and after a disaster, and that's important to understand. And no one really knows until a disaster happens. And again, it may be some time before repairs are made to the infrastructure and the cellular network is back up and working. And another reason that cell phones may not work during and after a disaster is that the system just may be overloaded. So many people trying to make calls and connect to the internet at once, and the system is just not designed to handle all of that at once. So again, no guarantees that a cell phone will work during and after a major disaster. Radios, on the other hand, most likely will work after a disaster. Certainly radios connecting with other radios, as we just talked about. And that's the reason why first responders and fire departments and police still use two-way radios to communicate because they are reliable during and after a major disaster. Here's another difference, and this one goes to the cell phone or smartphone. We all know smartphones connect to the internet. You can run apps, you can browse websites, you can watch videos, and so on your cell phone. You can't do any of that on two-way radios, specifically the two-way radios for the GENOAK network. They don't have the ability to run apps. They don't have a large graphic screen. There is no connection to the internet and so on. So that is a big difference to know. Now, some other types of radios, not GENOAK, but what are called amateur or ham radios, can send email, they can transfer files. There is a higher speed type of internet capability with those two-way radios, but not with the GENOAK radios. So in this case, the mobile or smartphone has that capability. Two-way radios do not. And then finally, they both need power to operate. If the batteries are dead or the charge is lost on your cell phone or on your two-way radio, they're not going to work. That's pretty obvious. Now, one nice thing about most two-way radios is that they have a rechargeable battery that is easy to swap out. So if you have a couple of extra batteries for your two-way radio and those are kept charged, then if you're using your radio and the battery runs out, you can just simply remove it from the back, replace it with another charged battery pack, and away you go. So just to keep that in mind. As noted, talking on a two-way radio, it's one to many, and only one person can talk at a time. Everybody else is listening. And then when that person is finished talking over their radio, transmitting, then someone else can then talk, and everybody else is going to listen. There is a way to manage this because often two or more people may try to talk at the same time, and that just doesn't work well with two-way radios. There's a way to manage it, and it's called through what's termed network control operator or net control, and we explain that on our GENOAK website. So take a look and you can understand how conversations can be managed over two-way radios. So we're going to talk about GENOAK now and communicating between individuals or community groups or organized neighborhoods or CERT teams, which is community emergency response teams, or people that are in hubs or apartment buildings or organizations. So people that are throughout Oakland and the East Bay can use two-way radios to connect with each other and communicate. And that's the purpose of GENOAK, and that's what we're going to talk about. First of all, why? Why do we want or need to communicate between each other? specifically during and after disaster. Well, we just already noted that cell and landline phone service may be disrupted and not available, at least for some time period. And it's still going to be important, and actually very important, to be able to communicate again during and after a disaster. We want to provide information to others. So what's going on around you? Is there a wildfire? Where is it? What direction is it headed? Are evacuation routes around you blocked? Is there a flood? Where is it? That information can be communicated over two-way radio and is going to be very important for others around us, either individuals or other groups, again, to understand. So we need the ability to do that, and that's what two-way radios in the GENOAK network can provide. We also may need to request and coordinate assistance. Maybe a neighborhood group has a specific need. They want to reach out to other neighborhood groups or hubs near them to see if anybody can help them. And then also to mobilize volunteers for search and rescue, for cleanup afterwards, and so on. So there are a lot of reasons why we will all need the ability to communicate with each other throughout Oakland and throughout our greater area. And once more, GENOAK provides the ability to do that using the two-way radios. So how? I just answered that. Using what are called General Mobile Radio Service, or GMRS. That's part of the GENOAK acronym, GMRS Emergency Network for Oakland. These radios are, or I should say the radio service is regulated and managed by the FCC. And it's available for anyone to use. And as already noted, it's free of charge to use this radio service or these radio waves. GMRS provides 22 channels, 22 specific channels, actually frequencies, but it's easier to think of them as channels. And those are, again, regulated and managed by the FCC, plus 8 repeater channels. And we'll talk about, again, a repeater in a bit. So essentially, you can talk to each other, one radio to another, one to many, on any of those 22 channels or over a repeater. You do need a license, which is acquired from the FCC, to use a GMRS radio, and especially with GENOAK. Once you get your license, and it's quite simple to do, there is no test, there is no exam to get your GMRS license. You just simply pay the FCC $35, and that's for 10 years. And then they will assign you a call sign. And here's an example of a call sign, WQOY819. That happens to be mine. That's a GMRS call sign that the FCC will give you once you acquire your license from them. And then once you do, you can have the ability to communicate over your two-way GMRS radio. Again, you can communicate radio to radios we've talked about, or one to many, or over this repeater. A little bit more on GENOAK. Again, GENOAK stands for GMRS. That's the radio service, emergency network for Oakland. GENOAK provides coverage throughout Oakland and much of the East Bay. We've designed GENOAK to be for emergencies and emergency preparedness use only. We have monthly check-ins so that people can practice using their radio and ensure that they can connect with others through our GENOAK radio network. And then we hold exercises during the year so that GENOAK operators can run through a simulated emergency and also practice using their radio to provide information to others, to provide rapid damage assessments, to request help from others, and so on. So all this is part of GENOAK, and that's our emergency network for Oakland. In terms of radio choices, I noted we do have those on our website. Some suggestions here are just a couple. GMRS radios generally run from around $35 now and up. per radio. You can spend a lot more for what's called a mobile radio, the one on the right-hand side. It gives you more capabilities, more power, some more features, but you don't really need that type of radio. Any of these handheld radios, people call these walkie-talkies, any of these handheld radios, and there are others we have on our website, work just fine with GENOAK for the most part throughout Oakland and throughout our East Bay. One thing to note that GMRS radio, to work with the GENOAK network, must be what's called repeater capable. So it must be able to work with a repeater. And again, we'll get to repeaters in just a moment. Most older radios, if you have a GMRS or what's called a family radio service, FRS radio, from more than 3 or 4 years ago, probably will not work with the GENOAK network. You need a more modern GMRS radio that is, again, what's called repeater capable. And we do list a number of suggestions on our website under the tab or the page called radios. So check that out and you can see, get more information on different radios and make a decision on which one would work for you. I did mention family radio service, FRS. That's another type of radio service from the FCC, managed by the FCC. It's a sister radio service to GMRS. They both use the same 22 channels so that your GMRS radio can talk to any family radio service or FRS radio you might be using within your neighborhood or within your hub or within your community to communicate amongst each other. GMRS radios can talk to FRS radios, no problem. So a couple different type of radio communications to cover. The first is called simplex, and that's simply radio to radio, one-to-one, one-to-many. So simplex is radio speak for radio to radio. That could be two GMRS radios talking to each other or more than two. That could be, I mentioned the family radio service, radio talking to GMRS radio. It doesn't matter. It just simply means direct radio to radio communication. And that can be over a fairly long distance. GMRS radios can talk to others, several miles away, or even longer if you have, for example, a better antenna attached to your radio. The other type of radio communications is via a repeater, and GENOAK does use a repeater for GMRS that covers the East Bay. And a repeater does just what its name implies. It repeats your voice transmission out to a larger area. If you look at the diagram, you can see that the repeater is on the left-hand side, and all a repeater does is it hears your broadcasts. For example, if you're using that yellow radio, when you transmit on the GENOAK repeater channel, there is a specific channel for GENOAK, configured for GENOAK. When you transmit on that, the repeater hears that, and then it just retransmits your voice out to a much wider area, a much greater distance. And it can do that because, one, repeaters are generally in a high area, in a tall area. Our GENOAK repeater is in the Oakland Hills at the top of the ridge, so it has a broad view, unobstructed view of Oakland and the East Bay. And repeaters generally have a fair amount of power, their transmitter. So your handheld radio is generally 5 watts or so, and the GENOAK repeater is around 50 watts. So by being high up, having an unobstructed view and having more power, it can hear your radio transmission and then rebroadcast that out to a large area. So you can see, for example, if you're using the yellow radio and you want to talk to the individual on the far right, that if you tried to do that via simplex, radio to radio, you probably wouldn't be able to communicate with them or connect with them, at least not very well, because you have trees in the way, you may have buildings in the way, you certainly have hills, terrain in the way. And radio signals, radio waves just don't go around things or over hills and terrain very well. But if you use GENOAK and you transmit on the GENOAK channel, the repeater hears it, the repeater sends it back out, that individual on the far right can probably hear you and then talk back with you quite well. So that's why we use a repeater for GENOAK and for our Bay Area. Here is actually the GENOAK antenna. It's up on a very tall tower. Again, it's up on the top of the ridge in the Oakland Hills. So it is quite high in elevation, and it covers a very large area. It actually covers south from Hayward up north through Richmond and all around sort of the East Bay area. And that's the GENOAK repeater. Taking a look at GENOAK operators that are around Oakland and our East Bay, you can get an idea of where folks are located, and you can see that we do have GENOAK operators, people who have their GMRS radio and it's configured to use the GENOAK network. We have folks up in Berkeley, Richmond, El Cerrito, down south. We don't have a lot of GENOAK users yet, or operators yet, in West Oakland and particularly East Oakland, and we're working on that, and we want to be able to fill in those areas with more folks that have radios and access to GENOAK so that we can, again, connect with each other, all of us, during and after disaster, and provide that important information or make requests for assistance and so on. You can see our repeater. Again, it's up on the top of the ridge at a high elevation, and certainly provides good coverage for the area shown here on the map. Besides GENOAK, there are other GMRS radio networks for emergency communications in our area. One of them is CERT, which is Berkeley's CERT neighborhood network. They have their own repeater. We partner with them, and we are able to use their repeater. They are able to use our repeater, which is good in terms of having a backup in case something were to happen to either one. And it's good that we do have people, not just in Oakland, but sort of across the East Bay, who have access to GENOAK, because we know that a disaster doesn't stop at city boundaries. And being able to share information across Oakland to Berkeley to El Cerrito and down south is, or may very well be, again, quite an advantage during and after a major disaster. So Lafayette, Moraga, and Orinda, they have their GMRS communications. They actually have 3 separate GMRS repeaters. They run exercises, they perform regular check-ins every month, and they have a very good network for community emergency response team communications through their GMRS radios. As well, Richmond, CERT, and Marina Bay Neighbors and West Contra Costa have a very active and engaged emergency response teams, and they use their radios as well, and they have regular exercises, and those are very well done. So there are several different GMRS emergency radio networks around the East Bay, and again, we all do work with each other, and you're encouraged to check out these other networks as well. That's everything. And we certainly hope that you, again, take a look at our website, genoak.org. If you have any questions, if you want to participate, if you'd like us to help you program your radio or even recommend a radio to use with GENOAK, please reach out to us, send an email, leave a voice message on our phone line, or go to genoak.org and fill out the contact form that's on our website. So again, please, we're here to help, and we'd love to have you as a GENOAK GMRS radio operator. Thank you, and have a great day.